Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Death Space Filling the Void. Life is getting very exciting. A lot of people are vaccinated. It's starting to get summery out. Summery. I don't know why I put it like that. We're heading in the hot dog season. Hot dog is one of those things that my New York accent will always come out for. I don't really have one otherwise, but or maybe I do. Some people tell me I do. But hot dog is one that where it comes out. Jamie always laughs at me every time I say hot dog. And we're headed into Memorial Day weekend, which is so fun. People are going to be at lakes, at the beach, at the pool, some body of water that they can get to, eating good food and hanging out with friends and family they may not have seen since before the pandemic. But it is important to remember what Memorial Day is actually about, and it's about the men and women who fight for our country that we've lost. And so it's a good idea to enjoy yourself, but think about the people who are no longer here, who sacrificed so much for us, and their friends and family. I've got a great interview lined up today, great episode. It's with my friend who I know from performing improv, Kirsten O'Brien. Kirsten is an actress, a dancer, and a comedian. Extremely funny and talented. And I should mention that this episode was recorded, I feel like June of 2020. As I was working through the format of the show and the artwork with my girlfriend Jamie, I was actually conducting interviews and building them up. So this is from George Floyd had just happened. People were protesting. It was the summer, so coronavirus cases were kind of taking a little bit of a lull there, I guess. And it's very interesting to look back on a time that wasn't so long ago. Kirsten is very open, very enthusiastic, and you get a lot of insight into what it's like to care for a parent who's on their way out. And then how that affects you, or affected her, going forward. What do you drop from your life? What does that teach you, that loss? Can you move forward in the same way? Well, I don't want to waste any more time, so let's jump right into the interview with Kirsten. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy. Now joining me, I have Kirsten O'Brien. She's an actress, a comedian, and we know each other from doing improv at the People's Improv Theater. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, you got it. Hi, Pat.
How's everything going?
Oh, just quarantine realness and, to like bring some joy into my life. I thought I'd do a podcast about death.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. On top of everything going on, George Floyd, quarantine, constant fireworks. We're also going to talk about death.
And we're going to talk about death.
Right. But it's a good thing. I part of why I started this podcast is I guess I've always been unsure about why we can't talk about death.
Yeah.
And I think talking about it just helps everyone.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, isn't that so much of what we're learning right now? Not only in quarantine, but we're addressing all of these conversations are coming to the forefront that people have been trying to avoid for years, if not decades, that have to be talked about.
Have to be talked about.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And hopefully, one of the positives of everything could be that we're just not as uptight with discussions that make us feel uncomfortable, learning to be uncomfortable and being okay and knowing you're all right.
Yeah. I think that's I think as a whole, especially Americans are very, very uncomfortable with being uncomfortable,
Right. Like even you saw it with plastic straws. And it's like, I gotta have my regular plastic. I can't have a paper. It's just like, how much does it change your life to just pour a cup to your lips?
Yeah. You see it with people with, wearing masks, not to like get off topic, but like that they're like, I'm uncomfortable. And it's like, no one cares. Deal with it.
People are dying.
Yeah.
People are dying.
So sorry you're uncomfortable. And I think that's a big thing. I think people feel that or at least I'll just speak for myself, with uncomfortable conversations, there is that innate human feeling of, we get the fight, flight, or freeze,
Mm-hmm.
and it can feel like we have the sensations of uncomfortable conversations feeling almost life-threatening. They're so uncomfortable.
That's a good point.
But checking in with the reality of what's going to happen to me if I talk about this. Well, you're just going to be uncomfortable and ride that wave and maybe learn something,
Totally.
Yeah.
Like our bodies haven't evolved from the like, do I need to run from this tiger or try to fight it? It's the same mechanism.
Yeah.
But really, it's just like, you're going to feel a little weird. And I think it's just like any other muscle where you're working it out and
it's a practice.
Exactly.
It's a practice, working the muscle of having uncomfortable conversations. So yeah, where do you want to start, man? What do you
this already I'm uncomfortable talking about. But I guess I'm just curious about like, when was the first time you knew about death? You felt the presence of death?
Let's see, if I really think about the first time. I mean, there were deaths in my family that happened, but that I wasn't super personally impacted by.
Right, like great uncles, something that,
Yeah, even cousins, but cousins that I didn't know very well. So.
And how does that feel? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But
well, what I will say is, so there's a lot of addiction in my family. There's a lot of substance abuse. And I mean, it's a reality. It's many families' realities.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that is that substance abuse and addiction is a particular disease that's not viewed as a disease in the same way as, say, other life-threatening diseases like cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would never blame someone for having cancer and dying from cancer, or like shame them and disconnect them from your family, or like, that would be crazy. That would be unheard of.
Right.
But when there's a death due to addiction, at least in my family, and we can relate to each other in this way, coming from like an Irish Catholic family, there is a lot of, my dog is chewing a bone. I hope that's not.
No, that's good. Okay. We like dogs on this podcast.
Yeah. How morbid. She's like chewing a bone. She gets it. But there was a lot of like secrecy and like a lot of like hush hush and like, we don't talk about that. So I actually had a cousin who was, when I was very, very little, who passed away. I think I might have been like 7 years old, and she passed away from, I mean, there's so much secrecy around it in my family that I actually don't know. That it was like, she was dealing with some health problems, but then it was sort of rumored that it might have been a suicide and that there was like substance abuse involved. I actually don't know.
Oh, like that. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. Is that in your house?
Is it my building? Yeah, I think so. Sorry. I was just like, wait, am I hearing things? So you don't even know recording during quarantine,
I don't even know. And those are the conversations so that is on my dad's side of the family, my dad's brother's child. And he had 2 girls and 2 boys, 4 children, 3 of which passed away.
Oh my
God. So 3 of my family, this is what I mean. Like, I don't even like recognize it until I talk about it.
Yeah.
And the other 2 definitely died of substance related.
Okay.
One OD'd. My cousin John definitely OD'd. I think it was either like, it was morphine at one point and then maybe heroin. He OD'd. Passed away. I think that was like in 2005 or 6. And or maybe even before, God, I can't even remember. That's so fucking awful. But it's like all sort of a blur. I think it's all sort of a blur because it was so not openly talked about in my family. When a death from substance would happen, it was kind of like, we just don't talk about it.
Why do you think that is? What are we protecting? Because obviously you were young at that point. What are we protecting young people from with that? Yeah, because there seems to be just like a stigma.
There's
attached to that.
stigma, shame around substance abuse, and it really sucks because it's so counterintuitive to those family members getting help.
Right.
Because if we can't talk about it openly, how can we seek treatment?
That's
It's
a great
like,
point.
you know what I mean? So my cousin John passed away, and then his sister also, I believe, was abusing prescription drugs and eventually passed away. So I have one surviving cousin from that side of my family. And I mean, what a fucking, I mean, all his siblings are dead. I mean, and he was the youngest. He is the youngest.
That must be so heavy.
So heavy. And I've always really wanted to talk to him more about that. But, you know, life, he lives in Denver. He has his own family. He has, you know, none of my family really lives out west. We're all from Massachusetts. But that's sort of that was like sort of my introduction to death, maybe. And then my father passed away in 2014. And that was, I mean, apparent. There's really no comparison. It's like such a deep loss. And I'm the youngest of 6 children. So he was 85 when he passed. He was 55 when he had me. So
oh wow.
Yeah.
Irish Catholic.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know it. And
how did he pass away?
He had some various health issues. He had a quadruple bypass like 10 years prior to that. So he had little heart attacks sort of his whole life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is sort of a common story. He had a quadruple bypass in 2001. And then, so by 2014, he was 85 and not eligible for any sort of like heart surgery. He had COPD, so he had breathing problems because he was a heavy smoker his whole life. And, you know, so like the combination of those issues, mostly his lungs and his heart, just at a certain point, they are too taxed. Yeah.
And it was a sudden?
Well, he was sick for a while, but he was still like up and at it and sharp.
Okay.
Like he wasn't in the hospital a lot.
Right. Okay.
He really wasn't hospitalized for a while until the end. And it was about, I want to say it was like 3 weeks to a month that he was like really in and out. And was in the hospital for, I think, like a week before he passed.
Okay.
And my brother called me at work one night. At the time I worked as a like front desk person at a spa, at like a hotel spa. And he called me and, you know, and I knew my dad was in the hospital, but things sort of seemed like they were improving. And like, you know, he had been in the hospital before and eventually gone home. And, and my brother called me and said, I think you should come home.
Oh man. Yeah.
You know, that's like the phone call that you dread. And, and I remember I was at work alone and it was close to closing time. And I literally closed the whole place.
I'm out of here.
Bought a one-way plane ticket on the computer at work and got in a cab to the airport.
Wow. I'm going.
I mean.
Yeah.
Dad.
Oh man. Yeah.
And like, God forbid you don't get there in time, you know?
Well, I'm curious about that. I feel like so many people put so much weight and like it can like harm them years after, like in a final reaction, or, you know, maybe a final interaction. You were racing to get there. Do you remember you did get there in time?
I did.
Okay.
He was alive for another 4 days actually. And I was so glad that I had that time with him. And it's, you know, I think different individuals and different families like have different ways of coping with death. It's a very like personal thing and like how much you want to be there. For me, I really wanted to be present for for him, and sort of also for the, there's a reason why we have the ritual of a funeral. It is truly at its most historical. It is a ritual. It is a death ritual, and different cultures have different rituals associated with it. The Jewish tradition of like sitting Shiva, and like, because there is something healing about that,
I agree.
Remembering a life and celebrating a life.
And a pause to like really make that your focus, and and go through the stages of grief, and share stories. And I remember at different funerals that I've been to, a lot of times I just remember kind of laughing despite everything that you feel, because you're telling stories, and it's nice.
Oh yeah, so much laughter at our family funerals. I mean, and and I think that's what those past family members would have wanted. They would have wanted to be together as a family and share, and it's bittersweet,
Yeah.
But, and there's also, I split time, like staying at my brother's house when my dad was sick, and I came home, and staying in the hospital. I happened to, he was getting really, really sick. It was to that point where the doctors pull you aside and say, we're doing everything we can, but it's just to make him comfortable.
Right.
So it's like that station.
That mode, yeah.
But he was lucid up until the end, which was really a gift.
What'd you guys talk about?
I mean, he could talk a little bit at certain times, and then it decreased, but he was really pretty lucid to the end. And, it was more just like a recognition.
A comfort of energy.
Yeah. And being able to, that's, you knew I was going to cry, and I'm going to make you so uncomfortable.
No. Believe me, crying is not making me uncomfortable.
It's everything else, right? But there's, with a parent, there's something like very special about caretaking for them. Like their final moments, because they like cared for you as a baby. They
this is the one that checked the closet for monsters and taught you how to ride a bike, and
this is the guy who like wiped my ass, and, like, and to be able to like give that final act of care
and comfort. Yeah,
it's in a lot of ways it's an honor, that like to see someone out of the physical world. So I stayed in the hospital. I was sleeping in the hospital the night that he passed, and I remember I could hear he had a respirator on, or oxygen mask.
Yeah.
And I could hear his breath through it. And I remember I was sleeping, and I woke up because I didn't hear it anymore.
Oh man. Were you alone?
My mom was sleeping.
Okay.
And she didn't wake up. And I remember I like went to get the nurse and told him, and he came in, and they have like a whole process where the nurses can't call time of death, the doctor has to. It's a whole like thing. And
well, describe to me that moment.
Yeah.
What's going on in your mind and in your heart?
Yeah, I mean, how do we describe that like I literally woke up because his soul left his body.
Yeah.
And it was a strange, obviously there was so much sadness and grief, and then to a degree relief, because we knew he was suffering. And so there is like a sense of relief that they're like at peace, not in pain.
That's a nice thought. Yeah.
Yeah. And also like severe great loss and sadness,
right, of course,
together. And then there was also a very strange feeling, like it happened very early in the morning, And so, and I called my brother and he was at home and he like raced over and we woke up my mom and we were together. And then as the morning came, various family members came to basically say goodbye, even though he had passed. It was like almost like a viewing in that way, but it was like in the hospital room. And, you know, the family was very like close and waiting, you know? So, but there was this strange feeling also of his body is there in the hospital bed. And like, I knew that wasn't him anymore. Like that.
I think that's so true. Because when you're at a wake and you're feeling a body, I remember, you know, both my grandmas. It's just like
it's not them.
It's not them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even because, like their posture is different.
Yeah, because it was like the vessel. You know, which I think confirms such a deep spiritual truth that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. You know, that like our humanity and our personality is not our soul, you know, not our deepest self. It's just how we navigate this earthly plane.
Right, this like meat puppet that we have to
right.
This works on this operating system.
And I think when you experience death on such a personal level, that becomes so much more deeply understood. You know, which for me like affected my own life and how I lived my own life. And
I definitely want to learn about how that moment has affected you, and I definitely want to get more in depth on spirituality. But tell me, how did that experience change you then, and maybe now? Maybe it's two different approaches.
I mean, it really just like zeroes in, like for me, and I've talked to other friends that have lost parents specifically, and I just zeroed in on like what was important, and like took a complete inventory of my life of like, what am I doing? Am I happy? Am I working where I want to be working? Am I doing what I want to be doing? Yeah, I remember that same year was the same year that the New York City sick pay laws were passed, which enabled part-time workers to have sick pay not only if they were sick, but if a family member was sick and you had to tend to them. And I remember filing for sick pay and my job fought me on it.
Oh man. Which you knew would happen, you know.
Yeah. As you say, and I ended up getting paid eventually.
Oh, good.
Didn't have to go very far. I really fucking read them to filth, to be honest. And I knew I had to quit that job. Because, like, what kind of institution am I working for if that's their response?
Right, giving your blood and sweat and tears, and they're not there when you need them.
You know, being like my personality, of course, I was the trainer and like the lead host and like type A fucking personality, like the most committed person to this dumb part-time job. And,
you bring enthusiasm to whatever you're doing, right. and that's great. That's why you're so likable.
Yeah, so thanks. But I was like, what the fuck am I doing?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? It was just sort of like, oh, I'm so good at my job and pride myself in my work ethic, and this is how you treat me? And I was like, I literally got my money and quit as soon as the holidays were over.
Good for you.
I wanted to spend time with my family. And they also fought me on that.
Your family fought you on spending time?
No, my job.
Sorry, I'm only teasing.
Yeah. To like go home for the holidays, even though I was the most senior person there. I was like, oh, y'all can go fuck yourself.
I just lost my dad, and now you're fighting me on being able to go see my family.
On being with my family for the holidays with the first.
All right, just wanted to pop in here real quick to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by my software tutor. Can Excel be my friend? I feel like during the pandemic, stuck inside, talking to the pots and pans, I was looking for a lot of friends in inanimate objects. But, we're getting back out there, we're going to see friends and eat hot dogs, things are going to be better. But many people have wondered this for years about the Excel being your friend, not, the hot dog part. The answer is yes, it can. My software tutor offers 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. You make friends with the instructor. They all deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly, supportive environment. It would be funny if the instructor wasn't friendly and just snapped at you. It's like, why can you not get this? I feel like I had teachers that would reach their patience limit and just snap at kids for not understanding a math equation or something like that. But that's absolutely not the case with my software tutor. These courses will increase your marketability, whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. Register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. 20% off! And you can throw something new on your resume. Today's episode is also brought to you by Garnished Entertainment. Are you missing your friends? Oh yeah, we were just talking about that. Tired of unwinding in front of the TV? Losing your marbles ever so slightly? Yeah, I just admitted to talking to pots and pans. Shake up your night with a Garnished virtual cocktail event. Garnished Entertainment is a New York City-based mixology event company with the mission of bringing communities together through creative and entertaining virtual cocktail classes. I've mentioned how I've taken one of these classes, but there's other people I know that have heard about them through the podcasts that I do, and they've loved it as well. So, fully recommend it. Ooh, Jamie and I recently made watermelon margaritas. Whoo-hoo! Life seems a little bit less heavy when you got a watermelon margarita. Anyway, whether you're catching up with old friends, team building with colleagues, or looking for the perfect date night, Garnished would love to be your host. Let's garnish. All right, let's jump right back into the interview.
Well, on top of the issues with payments, what else led you to want to get out of that job? Was it seeing that life has an end and really to your core seeing that? Or was it you want to make your dad proud or...
I mean, a lot of those things, I think it really magnified truths that I already knew.
Okay.
I've always been a real risk taker. When I moved to New York City to be a professional dancer, I bought a one-way plane ticket, sold my car, and moved to New York.
Really? I didn't know that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so brave. Good for you.
Yeah. I mean, so it's kind of this mentality of leap and the net will appear,
Yeah.
So it was that same where I had sort of lost a little bit of that because New York City is hard and
beats you down for sure.
You need to make a living and you need to pay your rent and I had just realized that I had been at this what was supposed to be a part-time job that allowed me to do other things on the side, which it did at times.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, it was, as most service jobs, was soul-sucking.
Yeah, unfortunately.
A very toxic environment.
Well, it's good you're out of there.
Yeah, and that was in 2015. Funny enough, so I'll out where I worked because I think it technically doesn't exist anymore. So I worked at the spa at Trump Soho.
Ooh.
In 2015, right before the presidential primaries began. So thank God I didn't be there.
Seriously.
Happening because it was so embarrassing.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, they took the sign off the building because people were boycotting it.
I would imagine. I wouldn't. Yeah.
People didn't want to stay at a Trump establishment.
I still, never again. Or not that I ever did.
Yeah.
Oh man. The death of your dad caused a lot of change immediately. How has that mentality, has that stayed with you over the years? Is that sort of, it does. It's still something a guiding light in your life.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
you know,
great.
yeah. And I think, it wasn't easy. Like I quit my job and I think I was like unemployed for 6 months. So like it was rough, but fortune favors the brave, right?
Certainly true.
I really, and that has been so much of my career of being like, oh my God, this is so hard right now. This is so hard. This is so hard. But like, I'm not giving up. I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Very positive. Yeah.
Like a bone would eventually get thrown to me. There'd be a lot of tears clean.
Right.
I remember not being able to like pay my credit card at one point and like bursting into tears and like my boyfriend lending me the money. And it was like, it was like $150, but it was like the straw that broke the camel's back,
Yeah.
You're just like,
totally.
What am I doing? But like, I always knew I couldn't go back to that job. And I knew that I believed in myself enough to work within my industry, which was as a comedian and an actor. And eventually I got a job that paid my bills as an actor. So
right. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, you eventually worked your way you were on a sketch team at UCB. You were a working actress, dancer. You accomplished what you set out to do in New York City.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still so much more I want to do, Yeah, I guess. And I sort of like base a lot of my decisions on that now, where I'm like, when friends ask for advice, I'll often pose the question, because by nature, I'm actually more of a people pleaser. And like, that's why I tend to be like at jobs. I'm like, I'm like,
you're great. Everyone's great. This is great.
Like so committed and like,
right.
Sometimes that can be to my detriment, but it is a good quality to have. I recognize the benefits of it. But I have a lot of friends who share that quality of being like people pleasers. And with this whole pandemic thing, a friend was like, I got offered back a job working as, a receptionist for almost minimum wage, and they're reopening next week. And I really don't want to do it because it doesn't seem worth the risk,
right. Going into an office right now is certainly not a place you want to be.
Or like a service job,
Yeah.
And for what? For $16 an hour? And I often pose this question of like, okay, so when you're on your deathbed, are you going to be like, oh my God, thank God I said yes to that job.
Exactly.
Made that person happy and comfortable and they approve of me. Like I got their approval.
That's great advice. I honestly, I think so many decisions, it doesn't even happen at like the forefront of my mind, but so many decisions of mine come with that exact, do I want to be able to say I went to bed early every night on my deathbed? Is that the story looking back that I want to have? I just think that's such a better way, not to judge how anyone lives their lives, but
right. But there's like, when we're making like big decisions like that, like job, oh well, I don't want to say no, I don't want to disappoint them. And it's like, are you gonna fuck about that when
disappoint them for sure?
Do what you need to do, like do what's best for you. And I think that's a level of self-care that can only be learned by experience. No, I don't give a fuck if this person approves of me or not. Talk about uncomfortable conversations. It's like, when, not to divert too much, but like, when shit's being said on Facebook right now, literally I had someone make a very inappropriate comment on Facebook, and it's a coworker from 15 years ago who lives in Florida, I never talked to, but like we're Facebook friends, And I was like, do I say something? Because I really feel like this person needs to be checked. But all of that fear comes up of like, oh my God, this person is going to like attack me or like hate me. And like,
what about that time we went to go get ice cream that one time? That was like, fun.
I don't even have a memory of this person, but the fear of someone being like offended or disappointed. But really, I think we're learning now, it's so much better to just broach the conversation.
Yeah.
The truth will prevail. Like, we have to speak up, And I think like when it comes to death, so many conversations, here's a crazy phenomenon that I experienced, and that I'm sure many people who have experienced death of a close loved one have also experienced. I remember specifically the people who reached out and the people who did not.
Yeah.
And
talk about knowing who your real friends are, and I don't mean that in like a vicious way. I just mean like people who get it.
And I think that beyond that, because I've been an offender of that, is oftentimes, I can speak from personal experience. I've known someone who had a loss or was going through something very difficult, and I didn't reach out because I didn't know what to say. And I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I think it's so much more important, and I think we're learning with current conversations right now that it's so much more important to just call and say, hey, I'm here.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I'm here. I just want you to know that I love you and I'm here and I'm listening. Because...
And let's talk about baseball. Let's talk about anything. Or let's talk about
whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm here to listen. I think we encounter the problems, and I certainly encountered when people try to fix it. You know, when they're like,
don't be sad.
And like be like, well, let's drink. And I'm like, fuck you. Like, I'm sad. Just like, let me be sad. No, I don't want to get drunk with you. Like, I just want to be sad.
Right.
And like, and
that's such a selfish thing to be like, let's drink.
Think it's where the discomfort is, that people are uncomfortable around grief.
100%.
And it really takes a specific friend, and a very evolved friend, to
very high emotional intelligence, to
sit with you with your grief, to just literally sit with you. And that's always, I always repost it every time I see it because it's so beautiful. Did you ever read the Winnie the Pooh books?
No, but I think I know where you're going with the quote.
Yeah.
I'll let you say it.
You know, Eeyore, who's like the sad, depressed one all the time. We can learn a lot from Eeyore.
Right.
He's alone in his little hut, and Piglet and Pooh go to visit him, and they're like, oh, you know, Pooh, we heard, or, you know, Eeyore, we heard you were sad, and like, what's going on? And he was like, oh yeah, I didn't reach out to you because I didn't think you'd want to be around me when I'm sad. Like, who wants to be around a sad donkey? You know? And they make room on the little log and just sit with him. And he's like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're just gonna sit with you. And he's like, but I'm sad. And they're like, well, we know. We're your friends. You know, and it's
so adorable. Yeah. And so true.
So like just a fucking punch to the gut, you know?
Yeah, that one just got me just now.
Ooh!
Yeah, just, ooh.
It just, and that is, speaking from personal experience, that is what people need when they're experiencing grief.
Totally. When my mom had breast cancer, I just remember, my mom, she had breast cancer in like 2011 and recovered, thank God. And, you know, just like you were saying, I remember the friends who just like brought over a pizza because I was staying at my parents' house and stuff like that. And it was just like, that's it, man. That's like, that means the world to people going through that. Means the world.
Just sit with me.
Just show up.
Yeah. Just show up, just like hold. And that's like this whole idea, you know, it's like sort of like a buzzword and maybe gets made fun of as like a woo-woo holistic thing of like holding space for someone. But it really, like, that's what it is. You're saying, I am giving you the emotional space right now to express yourself however you need, and I will witness it. Something to like being seen.
Totally.
To be validated, of like your grief to be validated. The worst things that people do are like when they try to change it, where they're like, oh, well, let's get drunk, or let's go out and like not think about it. And it's like, no.
If I drink, I'm only going to think about that.
Yeah.
Like any other thought will be eliminated.
Right. Or like, or like the worst is when people are like, well, everything happens for a reason. And you're like,
No, my father's not
oh my
dying.
God, fuck you.
Oh God.
Yes, I see the truth of that on like a spiritual level, that like lives and deaths have like ripple effects, that
Mhm.
like we don't know the bigger picture from like a higher power standpoint, but that is the last thing you need
It's
to
just,
say to
yeah,
someone who's grieving, you know?
seriously.
So there's
Well,
that.
well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. You know, we kind of came full circle back to like the difficulty of discussing death. I'm very curious in getting your thoughts on spiritually, what happens when we die?
Mhm.
That's such a big question, and one I'm very
Yeah.
curious to get everyone's perspective on.
Yeah. So I was brought up Catholic, but by
Hmm.
no means do I consider myself, I consider myself reformed.
Yeah.
Recovering
Yeah.
Catholic, recovering Catholic. I
Uh-huh.
said this to someone the other day, you know, hey, do what works for you. Like everyone should do what works for them. If being a Catholic makes you a better person, be a
Hmm.
Catholic. I don't give a fuck. You
Hmm.
know, it doesn't, the way I grew up in Catholicism doesn't work for me. I think it did more harm than good.
Hmm.
Um, I think spirituality, on the other hand, is different, and that has enhanced my life greatly. But
Yeah.
that's through a lot of my own volition and research and reading. And so I wouldn't really say that I have a religion, because a religion is like a institutionalized practice, and
Hmm.
like spirituality is maybe something else. Like I have my
Like
own
an omnipresent
yeah,
in
like
your
I have
mind.
my own belief system.
Hmm.
Um, I would say I definitely believe more in like karma, which is like a more Eastern.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
in fact, I'm reading a really interesting book right now called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukov. And he talks about karma in a way, because oftentimes the argument with karma is, well, then how do you explain sick children? You know, like they're innocent.
Hmm.
Like how could they
How can that
karmically
be right? What
deserve
did
that?
they do? Yeah.
Right. So he talks about the idea that karma can be intergenerational, and that if something is not worked out in one lifetime, it will be passed on to the next. And,
Oh.
you know, not to like cross section the topic, but if we're talking about death, you know, we see someone like George Floyd,
Hmm.
his death, the ripple effect of his death and his soul,
Hmm.
that's a huge soul. And this
Oh
is
yeah.
something
A very
Oprah
big
talked about.
ripple. Yeah.
Yeah, that not only his life but his death has so much meaning and
Hmm.
changed. There's that video of his daughter saying, my daddy changed the world.
And he has
Love it.
look how much has already
Whew,
changed.
right.
Right.
And
That
that's
video is particularly gets
gut
the
wrenching,
tissues. Yeah.
but beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
um so, you know, where do we go when we die? Like, I personally believe there's like some level of karma, but also I definitely have gotten many, many signs from my father. Dreams, he's been in my dreams a lot of times, to the point where it was like I even questioned it in the dream and he answered me. So, like,
Really?
yeah, and like you know, I think people interpret that in like weird ways. It's been scientifically proven, you know, like in physics, that energy never ceases to exist. It's just transformed, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So if you have the life force, the like literal electricity that animates a body, where does it go? It goes
That's a great
somewhere.
question. Right?
It
It
goes
has to.
somewhere.
Well, even going back to talking about viewing a body and awake, and how it's different, something has left.
Yes.
And where does that go?
Yeah. Where does that literal if your heart stops beating, they like hit you with the zapper, you know what I mean? Like there's an electricity, there's an energy to a life force to our bodies. And where does that go? Where does that energy go? And maybe that's the same as the soul. Maybe that's different than the soul. I don't know. I sort of consider Gary Zukov calls the soul like the mothership. He talks about how our particular life in this form is that personality and body that we are in at the moment. And we're trying to follow the soul's purpose, the mothership. We're trying to fulfill that destiny in this lifetime and stay attached to the mothership,
And it feels like that's getting into whether or not we have free will, which is a whole other conversation.
Well, yeah.
Or maybe not.
I believe that we do. I think if, to circle back of what happens when we die, I think our free will is in the human experience. It's through our body and through our personality, how we navigate this human experience and how we navigate the purpose of our soul
is up to the individual.
And certainly up to free will. And there are systems that guide and change the circumstances,
Of course, right.
And it's how we navigate those systems, I think, in those circumstances.
Wow, that is incredibly thought-provoking. You'll definitely have to send me those books again, so that I can read them as well, because of course I have a podcast on death and dying. I'm very interested in such topics. Well, I just want to thank you for being so open and honest. I know these things can be so tough to talk about and relive, but I really appreciate it.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I love the idea of setting your own boundaries for your spirituality. Everyone's different. And if church works for you, that's great. But if you are interested in something else, it's all about finding peace. And however you go about that, as long as you're not hurting anyone, that's wonderful. Oh, man. It's also so heavy to think about the unnecessary shame associated with addiction in terms of people who pass away, and then it feels like it typically gets swept under the rug and not really talked about, and that's just so heartbreaking. Not the answer. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but not talking about it, I know, is not the answer. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to rate and review it. You can check the show out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. I also have another podcast called That Gives Me Anxiety. It's a little bit lighter and about the things that scare us and why they may not be so scary after all. I just want to say thank you again, and I'll see you again next Thursday. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy your hot dogs.